Welcome back to Beyond Bandwidth, Leviton's podcast series where we dive into network technology's hottest topics. I am your host from Leviton Network Solutions, Roy Chamberlain. The discussion for this series is based upon distributed antenna systems. Today we are talking with Chuck Bowser. Chuck is the technical training manager for Leviton Network Solutions Contractor program and also the host of the podcast, Let's Talk Cabling. All right. Welcome, Chuck. Welcome to Beyond Bandwidth.
Roy, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast. How you doing, my friend?
Very good. Very good. Chuck, for the listeners, can you give us a little background on yourself?
Absolutely. So I've been in the communications industry since 1982. So if you do the math, carry the one, it's over 4 decades of experience. I don't even want to think about how many years of experience it is. I started off when we weren't even putting in category rated cabling. We were putting in POTS cabling and dual RG59 coax. I've held all kinds of positions from an apprentice to a technician to a project lead, project manager, estimator, trainer, lots and lots of experience. I worked for contractors for probably 60% of my career. And now I'm the contractor trainer for the eastern side of the United States for Leviton. So I'm in daily contact with contractors, teaching classes all the time. As a matter of fact, I just taught a virtual class yesterday. And I also run a small little podcast called Let's Talk Cabling, where we educate, encourage, and enrich the lives of people in the ICT industry. And it's got a small little following. We're only about 15,000 followers right now. I'll never be a big podcast like Mr. Beast, but super niche. But I don't measure my success in the number of subscribers. I measure my success in when I meet people at conferences or people send me emails and they say, Chuck, that episode on, project management really helped me a lot. Or, hey, I decided to pursue my RCD now because all the information you're putting out, that's how I measure my success. So, being a contractor and still staying plugged in with contractors, I think I got a pretty good view of what contractors think and desire when it comes to the low voltage industry.
Yeah, no, I agree. And thank you for that. I learned some stuff about you right there. And remember when we used to do those remote Bixie events and we would be on there, you were always good at asking those questions. And I would see that stuff on LinkedIn, the question of the day.
Oh yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. You're talking about like the acronym challenge on the first virtual conference that Bixie did after COVID.
Yeah.
The room was moving kind of slow. And I was like, I'll just do my acronym challenge because I do this before virtual classes too. In the chat box, I'll hit people with a bunch of things and I'll get the class going. So I was like, might as well do it here in the conference, and it attracted a lot of people.
Yeah, I know I had to work some of those. Like you said, it kept things light and interesting.
Yep.
So this series is on distributed antenna systems, DAS, and knowing that you train and deal with a lot of contractor on that side of the business, many contractors might feel like DAS is kind of out of their reach. What would you say to someone who thinks DAS projects are too complicated or costly for a small team?
I really would tell them a good contractor is always looking to grow their skills and start small and scale up. Just to kind of give a parallel, most people that know me know that I have a small little farm here in Central Florida. Well, technically it's a homestead. It's not really a farm. And I've been doing it for 10 years now. And we've got ducks, goats, chickens, aquaponics, garden beds. And people look at me like, man, you must have been doing this whole your life. It's like, no, I started 10 years ago. But I didn't start off doing everything at once. First, I started off with, having chickens to get eggs. And then we moved to having chickens to grow for meat. And then we started doing, so we just kept adding skills. A good contractor should be doing the exact same thing. So start small and then scale up. When you look at distributed antenna systems, especially your smaller contractors, they're going to shy away from it because, like you said, they're going to feel like it's way too complicated. But when you look at all of the components that are in a DAS system, right? You got transmitters, you've got receivers, you got amplifiers, converters, connectors, antennas, and even cabling. There's a lot of stuff there that overlaps with what they're doing already when you talk about structured cabling systems. Mm-hmm. So start off there, to pick the ones you want, and then expand into other areas of DAS as you go along. And the way that you do that is you focus on training. Now, there's lots of great resources for DAS systems out there. I mean, even the industry training that we look to for the most is Big C, Building Industry Consulting Service International. So they've got several things out there. If you go to the 15th edition of the TDMM in chapter 16, the wireless chapter of the TDMM, they got 26 pages dedicated just to DAS systems. What all's involved, what kind of verticals you're going to put this in. But that's not the only place. I've also got, let me reach over here on my desk. I've got the Big C ANSI 006 standard for distributed antenna systems and implementation best practices. So literally with just a little bit of investment of buying a couple books and reading through them, you can become familiar enough to start small and work your way big. But you can also leverage vendor support. Hopefully most of the contractors already listening to this program are pretty familiar with how to do structured cabling systems. If not, obviously you can contact Leviton and we'll help you, design or train you or do whatever we need to do. But also when you look at the other, like the transmitting manufacturers, the receiver, the amplifier manufacturers, a lot of those also have assistance and training. All you got to do is ask. If you don't ask, the answer is always going to be no. And the majority of the time, a lot of that training is absolutely free. All you got to do is invest some time. That's all you got to really do. But so my I guess my biggest thing is, don't be afraid of DAS. Just there's a project management analogy. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Right.
So approach DAS the exact same way. Look what it's all involved. There's already going to be some crossover with what you're doing. Pick one new skill set. Okay, maybe we want to learn how to do antennas. Make that a skill set to develop your team. Once you're comfortable with that skill set, then layer on another skill set. And then before you know it, you're going to have that full functioning farm with all those animals and all those vegetables being grown.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. So what are some of the core skills that a low voltage contractor should have or develop to start working in DAS systems?
So because of the structured cabling side, so you should already be familiar with designing, installing, and certifying category rated cabling, fiber optic cabling, how to do tier 1 testing, tier 2 testing. That's just going to be a foundation to get you there. But then you really start looking at, for example, like increasing your knowledge on RF basics. You got to be very familiar with radio frequencies and the principles that are going to be crucial for DAS system. For example, signal propagation. Right? A lot of people don't realize that when a radio transmitter transmits, it has attenuation just like a cable has attenuation. And when radio signals go through, let's say my house is made out of pretty much gypsum and wood framing. Yeah. An RF signal would have pretty much no problem going through my house. But my wife and I, because of the latest hurricanes, we're thinking about maybe tearing this down and building up a concrete block house. Well, guess what? Radio signals don't go through concrete block as easily.
Right.
Then you also got to start thinking about interference. When you start doing DAS systems, we got to think about all the other systems are going to be there that could potentially interfere with it. Old people like me, you probably remember the days when you'd be listening to AM radio. I used to love listening to talk radio on AM radios when I was a technician. I'd be driving through, north of Baltimore somewhere, listening to Paul Harvey, and I would go underneath a power lines, and you get that zzz, and the voice would go away and come back. Well, that's a lot of people now they're watching, listen to stuff on their phone, so they don't get that interference and don't realize, hey, that's a problem with RF knowledge, and you got to know that. And then the biggest thing I would probably say that the skill that they really need to develop, and this kind of really goes to all contractors, right? Project management skills. This industry, we've made strides, but this industry is horrible in project management typically, because what we'll do is we will hire, the technician who does the best and put him in a project management role. And those are different skill sets, right? So with DAS projects, they're going to require even more planning and more installation, more integration, because you're going to be dealing with not just the end user, you're going to be dealing with carriers who they don't move at the speed of light like our industry does, right? And you might have to interface with other trades, because if you're starting off small, like I said, you might be subcontracting somebody to put in the antennas and the transmitters and and doing all the heat mapping and all that other stuff. And that might not be something you're familiar with. So you have to integrate with them, but you got to somehow incorporate it all in your project. And that's where good project management skills from. So those are the three biggest areas that I think if somebody wants to develop their skill sets, I think that's where they should start.
Yeah, well, that's in line with the first question, as far as taking the small pieces and like you said, you build with what you know and then you take on where you need to fill those gaps. So now we've kind of talking about a little of the skill set. What kind of essential tools or equipment should a contractor invest in to want to begin with working with DAS installations? Can contractors get started with what they already have?
If they're starting small, like I said, they're already doing structured cabling. That's only one of about 8 components of DAS systems. So
Yeah.
make sure you have that a good solid foundation for that one first. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of contractors out there that don't understand the difference between certification testing, qualification testing, and verification testing, because those are three different testers. So make sure you're really familiar with certifying copper cabling and fiber cabling. That's going to be your foundation that you're going to build upon. And
Yeah.
then the next step from there, I would say start looking at basic RF testing equipment, like a spectrum analyzer, maybe even a signal strength meter. When I used to work for a company called Super TV back in the 80s, I got into doing cable TV installs because I wanted to be a cable guy. And so I was on top of roofs, and we had our RF meter hooked up to the TV, and we would fine tune it to find the signal. And once we found the correct path for the signal, we had to kind of go 20 degrees off to each side and look for what's called multipath, because that's interference, right? So you got to understand, what does that look like on a meter, and is there enough coverage there? And then also, is there enough signal strength? And that all comes with learning the basic RF testing equipment. And then for some smaller projects, you might have to be dealing with signal boosters or repeaters. And that's about amplifying that signal to get to the repeaters and the boosters. That's going to be a very cost-effective starting point for DAS work. So the basic RF testing would be the next one. And the next one after that is they start looking at signal boosters and repeaters.
Yeah. DAS can sound highly technical. What's one part of a DAS project that tends to surprise new contractors for being a little easier and simpler than what they expected?
There's a couple there. First one, probably coverage mapping, because it sounds kind of really technical. It's like doing a heat
Yeah.
map with wireless, right? And
Right.
it does involve a different tester. It does involve some additional skills. But once you play with it and you do it, I think you're going to find that, coverage mapping is so much easier than it looks like. It's like fiber nowadays. A lot of people shy away from fiber. Now, when I first learned fiber, that was a true skill. But in today's environment, manufacturers have come up with fusion splice-on connectors and mechanical connectors. Almost anybody can do fiber nowadays. So coverage mapping is pretty much the same way. It looks very daunting, but the software is pretty intuitive. It's kind of like the computer software that you have on your computer. It's really easy to work through. And then the signal distribution hardware. And if you think about it as how the water is going to flow through the system, the signal is the same way. It's got to go through the signal distribution. As long as you think about that, especially when it comes to setting up the splitters and the couplers, it really becomes super easy. It's more straightforward than most people would even think about. And then the last one too is dealing with the cellular carriers, because a lot of times you're talking about small little mom and pops, or maybe a company that might have 10, 15, 25 technicians. They're not a mom and pop, but they're a little bit bigger. But then they're dealing with these cellular providers who might have 50,000 employees, 100,000 employees. So they get kind of afraid of cellular carriers, but the cellular carriers have a vested interest in working with you, because that's their end user. So sometimes they will bend over backwards to help you if you get the right person within the company. There's always going to be that outlier where there's going to be one person within a cellular carrier that's not going to be the easiest to work with. But by far, most of them are going to be willing to assist you in planning and optimizing your signal performance. All you got to do, again, is just ask.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if their signal works in the building, right, or in the area, then that's their goal. So there's a joint vested interest in the success of gaining signal for these cellular companies. And I agree with that. On our structured cabling side, with mostly commercial and even residential, we think of enterprise wireless and things like that. And like you said, when you start moving to cellular, it's like, okay, well, what is this? Those are people that don't interact with us, right? We don't cross paths that often. But now distributed antenna systems with DAS and even more so as we move towards 5G, there's definitely going to be a lot more of that crossover, and our contractors are going to be the people that are going to be needed to support the installations and implementations, because it's becoming pretty big, especially with E911 and things like that. So for a contractor who is starting out, what kind of support or partnership should they look for when working on DAS projects for the first time? Let's say they're in a situation and their client says, hey, we need better cellular signal, and they're not involved in that. Where do they start?
Yeah. But before I answer that, I got 4 words that everybody who wants to be successful in this industry should know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's be a constant learner. Be a constant learner, because our industry is always changing. And that's going to help with everything that we've been talking about so far on this episode. It's going to help with everything. Now, for a contractor who's starting out, there's lots of support out there. You could look at doing partnerships with DAS vendors. Many of those vendors have programs to support their contractors. Roy, you and I both work for Leviton, and we know that there's a thing called the Contractor program within Leviton. And so if they want to join the program, we help make sure that their technicians are up to speed on the code, standards, and best practices. But that's not the only way that Leviton provides help for people. If you get asked to do something, for example, like you got a PoE device that's 5,000 feet out there, and you think, oh my gosh, my copper cable won't get out there. You can call us up, and we have subject matter experts that will help you solve that problem. If you get asked to design something that you ain't never designed before, you can give Leviton a call, and we will help you design that, and for free. It's the same thing with DAS vendors, right? They understand that it's going to be a mutually beneficial relationship. If you express enough interest, you make a connection and work up a partnership with them, they're going to help you overcome those hurdles. You can also look at doing collaborations with experienced DAS integrators. There's always people out there that between the customer and typically the low voltage contractor, it's usually an integrator. Partner with them. Find someone who's very successful in your area. Don't pick somebody who's got bad reputation. Find someone who's successful in your area, and then approach them. Just go to industry events. You will come across them, and they're gonna, and you start partnering with them. They will be able to give you real world experience. They're going to be able to give you insight, and then they might even be able to mentor you. On my podcast, many times I've always told people, it's so easy to find a mentor. All you got to do is ask. Just find someone who's got the position you want, who's successful at it, and ask them to mentor you. Most of them will say yes. Same thing with the integrators. They will help you develop your skill sets. You also can't forget about the carriers, right? You have to build a good relationship with the carriers, because this is a small industry, a super small industry.
Yeah.
And if you get a bad reputation, you will get shut out pretty quickly. And same thing with dealing with carriers. So make sure that you have a good relationship, and then with the carrier, and that's going to open up doors, because once they realize, hey, this contractor is really super good at doing, transmitters and receivers, and they're super great at structured cabling. Because the funny thing is carriers, they're really good with wireless. They're really good with POTS circuits. They're not so good with category rated cabling. And guess what you should be familiar with? You should be the expert in is category rated cabling. So What you're doing is you're finding a weakness for them, filling in that weakness. You identify your weakness, and they will help you as well. So build that relationship with that carrier. And I think basically all these points will give you a well-rounded approach to doing more DAS work. The only thing that's stopping you is you.
Yeah, that's great. Chuck, you have a great way of presenting the details on this, and I think this gives contractors, more confidence in getting into this growing technology that's going to be out there. And with some of the other spaces and areas where some of the growth has slowed down, distributed antenna systems is one that's on the rise, and it's not going anywhere soon. We all know that. Everybody uses their cell phone. It's definitely a bring your own device environment out there in every workplace. So yeah, thank you very much. This was really great talking with you and hearing what you had to say. I'm definitely going to be checking in on your social media and your podcasts. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Beyond Bandwidth is a podcast series produced by Leviton Network Solutions. For more information on the topics we talked about today, as well as other enterprise or data center network infrastructure content, or to check out all available episodes of Beyond Bandwidth, visit us on the web at leviton.com/beyondbandwidth, or wherever you normally listen to podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd appreciate you leaving an honest review in your podcast application. Along with word of mouth, leaving a review will help others find our show. I'm Roy Chamberlain, and this was Beyond Bandwidth. Until next time.